Great. Well, welcome everyone to Embracing Neurodiversity, Unlocking Hidden Talent in the Workplace. This is a series put on by the Community AMA series. If you don't know what that is, it's Community Ask Me Anything series. So it's co-hosted today with that chapter as well as the global chapter. And we are so excited to have our speaker here today. Your community team, myself and Demario Bell, who's here. Shout out to Demario for everything you do and being an amazing colleague. Thanks for being here, and just excited about keeping the momentum of this series going. So the purpose of today, the purpose of the AMA series is to harness the collective knowledge of our Culture First community to create a better world of work. And by engaging with experts like Tameka Allen, our speaker today, we explore critical topics such as neurodiversity, highlighting its importance on unlocking hidden talents and fostering an inclusive environment. Together, we aim to break down barriers and create a workplace where individuals' potential is celebrated and realized. We will have a chance to do we had a little bit of a welcome here. This is what we're doing right now. We're going to hear from Tameka Allen. We'll have a time for a Q&A session. So if you have any questions throughout, please make sure you drop them in the chat. And then if you give a like or an upvote to those questions, we'll make sure to try and get those prioritized to be answered first from Tameka. So that's going to be kind of the way we'll process this throughout the day. And then we'll have some closing announcements and get out of here. So it'll be a quick hour together. If this is your first gathering with the Culture First community, and you're wondering who we are a group of people around the world united in the shared belief that a better world of work is possible. And by golly, we are willing to do something about it. We have 5 core principles. This is the glue that holds us all together. At this point now, we have over 100 global chapters. And so we've hosted already almost 200 events to date, which is through this year, which is bananas. And at every gathering, we ask people to embody these principles. So the first principle is around fostering belonging and acceptance, just letting people feel seen, valued, and appreciated for being them and showing up. The second principle is having the willingness to reflect and grow. If we're on this mission to transform the future of work, that then goes to our organizations doing the work, but ultimately that starts with us being the change we want to see in the world. The third core principle is having the courage to be vulnerable. This idea of like we're constantly wearing masks or belonging badges or ways of identifying ourselves. And if we're willing to be more of our real and authentic selves, it gives other people permission to do the same. It creates more trust and psychological safety on our mission of doing this work together. The fourth core principle is putting learning into action. We hope that you are inspired to take what you learn here today and apply it into the way that you live or the way that you work. And it's not just information in one ear and out the other. And lastly, connection inside, business outside. This is a fancy way of saying that in the context of this gathering, in this container today, we ask that you connect on the inside first as human beings. And if that leads to you all doing business outside of this gathering, that's awesome. But like hardcore sales and hardcore networking is not the purpose of this gathering. So we're here to learn and grow together and create actual genuine relationships with one another. Today is our featured speaker, Tameka Allen. She's the founder and chief people and culture consultant for Mod Culture. She has an extensive background in HR. She is a thought leader in the space around neurodiversity. I'm so excited. And she's also a Culture First chapter lead for the Houston chapter. Pew, 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 pew. So if you're in the Houston area and want to get together with Tameka or her co-lead Stephanie Laredo, who's also on the call here today, definitely reach out and stay connected to them. I'm so excited to learn from Tameka and just really looking forward to soaking up all of the knowledge here. I've already got my notes tab pulled up in Notion. So let's go. I'm going to hand it off to you, Tameka. Thank you so much for collaborating with us, and over to you, my friend.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for joining me today. I'm going to quickly share my screen so we can get into today's topic. All right, can you all see my screen? Excellent. Excellent. So embracing neurodiversity, y'all, we are unlocking hidden talent in the workplace today, and I'm excited to share with you. Jessie shared our agenda just to give you a breakdown of what my time with you is going to be like. And then also just some reminders. Feel free to engage. We want to make this environment neuro-inclusive as well. So however you feel comfortable, I know Jessie pointed this out as well, which I love. Engage how you feel comfortable, whether it be on video, if you want to just hang out in the chat, you can do that as well. I know we're going to have to where we can post questions here, so that would be great. And then also too, let's just treat this like Vegas. What happens here stays here first. Anything that might be confidential or sensitive to someone who's being vulnerable to share. And then get those emojis and like those one character prompts ready, because I'm going to be asking some questions, and we'll have a little bit of engagement along the way as well. So in the chat, first things first, how would you rate right now your knowledge of neurodiversity in the workplace based on what you know right now? No judgment, just pop that in the chat, either A, B, or C, whatever you feel like best aligns with your knowledge level right now. So that first one is going to be just some awareness, like maybe some limited understanding of what some conditions maybe that align with under neurodivergence you may have heard about. B is like you've kicked up on the knowledge, you're strong about those conditions and workplace challenges and support strategies. And then C is you have pretty in-depth knowledge of the previous mentioned, relevant to laws and regulations, and you are like the go-to guru in your workplace as far as neurodiversity. Pop that in the chat. So I'm going to peek out here and see what we got. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of A's and some B's as well. Oh, I see some C's in here. That's cool. I love this. And so I believe that for the vast majority of you who are popping A's into the chat, I think that is also the key to why we need to increase more awareness around neuro-inclusivity in the workplace, around this overlooked and underserved talent pool. So here's our current state of where we are with neurodiversity, right? 20% of our global population identifies as neurodivergent right now. And out of those companies who are implementing DEI programming within their companies, only 4% that we know of today offer programming for those with disabilities, which is where neurodiversity would fall under. And that's for visible and non-visible disabilities. When we're properly supported, 30%, we're approximately 30% more productive than our neurotypical counterparts. And we'll talk more about what those terms mean in just a minute. And here, out of California, there's an institute out of California that recently released some information that this population may be as high as 30 or 40% in the US, right? These are huge numbers when we think about the state of where we are. And then now take those stats and combine them with this. The unemployment rate for the neurodivergent community is 30 or 40%. That is 3 times higher than people with physical disabilities, as well as 8 times higher of people with non-disabilities. These are huge statistics, right? Some of these that have been shared from Culture Amp's data scientist team. I know there's some here, so shout out to them. But this really paints a picture of how large this gap is for us right now. And Jess has shared a little bit about me, so I won't go into all of this stuff, but you've heard a little bit about me, about my background. Basically, I started this consultancy because of a personal professional connection that I have to it, which I'll share with you here right now. So for those of you who watch Golden Girls, picture it. Hammond, Indiana, 1985, right? My second grade teacher shared that we had earned a trip to the movie room to watch a film strip. And yes, I'm completely dating myself. I'm a proud Gen Xer. So we actually formed a single form line and we walked to the movie room, and that line was outside of the door to get in to watch the film strip. But before we could go in, there was one last thing we had to do. We had to pass an oral quiz, and in this particular instance, it was with my nemesis, math. It was with my nemesis, math. Y'all, I was having a time. I was seasick with math, but there's reasons for that. And this is how I felt. I had a whole Ralphie moment in that moment, thinking, how in the world am I going to get through this? And the reason why I was panicking and anxiety literally went through my body, it was not because I didn't know the math. It was because my brain was struggling to process audible information. There was a lack of executive functioning, and the ultimate culprit in this instance was it was impacting my direct memory, my working memory, right? So if I had something visual, I was good to go, but just orally, there was a struggle there. So how did I get through that moment? I didn't know what this meant then, but intuitively, I just felt the need to close my eyes. And as the teacher called out the problems, I was literally able to visualize them and then answer them because I could see them just like they would be on paper. Fast forward to my career, that led to more processing audible information, trouble focusing and concentrating, sensitivity to light, sensitivity to sound. All of these things started to impact my experience growing up as well as into my corporate career. And I felt myself working really, really hard, what it felt like in comparison to my colleagues. And even though I was overperforming, I was exhausted. And then this happened. Things kind of came full circle when my daughter was diagnosed neurodivergent when she was in the 4th grade. And we're reviewing her evaluations from our private psychologist. We had meet with her as well as her school psychologist. I kept thinking, I do that too. Oh my God, I do that too. And eventually I was evaluating and diagnosed and discovered I was not alone. As I started to share about this journey on LinkedIn and other social platforms, I felt I was quickly inundated with messages from other people who were going through this journey publicly and privately. And then as I started to reflect on my career, particularly in people and talent, the scale seemed kind of tipped, right? The experience really favored neurotypical candidates and employees versus those who were neurodivergent. And then as you start to look at, this is by percentages of population, marginalized communities here in the US, right? When you look at women, when you look at race and ethnicity, when you look at the LGBTQIA plus community, when you look at those communities and the percentages as far as size, and then also reflect on when you see DEI programming or anything around inclusivity, normally you always see something representing these other groups regarding women, race, and sexual orientation and gender identity. But sometimes, many times, this group serving the neurodivergent community, there's a gap where there's something missing. So what is neurodiversity, right? This is probably one of the biggest things that gaps I've noticed when I talk to founders, when I talk to people leaders, even some DEI professionals, because that is a very broad topic about what it actually is. So neurodiversity actually includes everyone on this call, right? It is all about all of the different ways in which we think. Versus neurotypical tends to be those thoughts and behaviors that are considered to be normal. So for some of those classmates I had in school, they were able to pop through that quiz with no problem while I was having a panic attack. It was because we thought differently, right? And for those of us who identify as neurodivergent, the differences in our brain impact how our brain works. And if you're wondering why the term neurodivergent, so if anyone on the call is familiar with the Australian sociologist, Judy Sanger, back in the 1980s, she coined these terms, right? And the reason why for that is because our community, for the most part, wants to be identified as being different, not necessarily having a weakness. Now, this is not an exhaustive list at all, but these are some of the conditions that fall under the umbrella of neurodivergence. And so I have those here. Some of them you may have heard of, some of you may not, as well as just some brief behaviors that may align with those conditions. So I would love to hear from you all in the chat, according to the corresponding numbers. Which one of these were you not aware that were associated with neurodivergence? I would love to hear that in the chat. Scrolling. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of sixes. Oh, okay, epilepsy, OCD, dyspraxia. Okay, okay, this is good. But yeah, so this list is not all exhaustive, but these are the most common, even though some of these you've not seen before. So let's look at some ways of how neurodivergence shows up in the workplace. These are just simple examples in different ways that neurodivergent talent might show up in the workplace that you may have seen before. So we'll look at these examples and talk about them. So let's look at the interview process. So I want you to imagine there's a software engineer candidate going through an interview process. And during the interview, this candidate occasionally loses their train of thought when answering questions and takes a bit longer to formulate their answers. And to the interviewer, they're perceiving this as the candidate's behavior is they're just not prepared. They can take time to prepare, or maybe they're disinterested in the position, and they have a lack of the ability to communicate well under pressure, right? And so I would love to hear from you based on what you know here. No judgment, right? We're all just learning. What condition is this behavior presenting, right? This is not about diagnosing the candidate or employee, but just based off of what you know so far, which condition would you say this aligns with? Okay. Give it a couple more seconds. Oh, wow. Oh, I love one of these answers. I see a couple of them coming through as well. Okay. So ultimately, if you said ADHD, you're correct. However, I do want to note there were a couple of people in the chat who noted that it could be all of them. And here's why it could be all of them. Because it was just until 2013 that clinicians were allowed to dual diagnose for more than one condition. So now that's why you see more people diagnosed as autistic and ADHD, right? So really, it could be all of them. But for the sake of this, really what's highlighted is the ADHD. So the manager did not consider that these behaviors could be related to that condition because they just didn't know. They really didn't know, right? They were aligning it with being an underperformer versus, or not being a quality candidate versus there's a possibility there's an underlying condition. And notice the candidate didn't disclose, but just for the sake of recognizing what that could look like. So some strategies for success could be sending a preview of the interview conversation, right? As I've led talent teams internally, it's normally a candidate NPS score will go through the roof if you just communicate with them in between stages. Set the tone for what you're going to be talking about, who they're going to be meeting with, right? And watch the experience go from an interview to a conversation about things that they've done and what they can add to your organization. If you really want to be bold, send the interview questions in advance, right? And watch that conversation take a turn. So let's look at team interactions, how this may show up on a team between colleagues. So imagine a recruiting team comes together for a sourcing jam. For those of you that don't know, recruiters come together all the time in groups in organizations to source for quality candidates, oftentimes for hard to fill positions. So the team is meeting on Zoom, and each person that enters the Zoom, the bell is going off, right? That notification bell is going off when you enter the Zoom room. And the TA leader is playing upbeat music. It's a bit loud, trying to get the energy going so we can source this candidate and set the tone for the meeting. And then when the meeting starts, everyone's on camera but that one recruiter. And so the TA leader gives the team 20 minutes to source 50 candidates. And at the end of the time, everyone has met or exceeded the goal but the one recruiter. And after the meeting, there were team members who expressed concern that the recruiter was low performing and they weren't sure if they were just even a good fit for the team. So based on what you have here, I would love to hear from you all again in the chat. What condition do you think this is aligning with? Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool beans. I think we got a lot. I love the answers that are coming through. So again, ultimately for this example, autism is being highlighted, but again, we saw many responses in the chat too that it could be all of them. They could be overlapping in those conditions, but ultimately for this sake, the team perceived the recruiter as low performing, but they were unaware of the signs of autism, which could be nonverbal communication and sensory overload. Maybe that's why they chose to be off camera, right? Maybe that's why they were muted until the meeting started. So some strategies for success, to give the option to be on or off camera, right? I know sometimes we have the perception that if someone's off camera, that they're doing something else, they're not paying attention, but that's not always the case, right? Communicate and encourage everyone to communicate in a way that works for them, and just make that a norm on your teams, right? And in this particular instance, versus, it is a thing in the recruiting industry, like there are certain metrics you do see a history of that can indicate how many applicants you need to ultimately get to an offer. But I've also experienced and led teams to where we sourced for quality versus quantity, and we're still able to get phenomenal results, right? And so this doesn't, sourcing 100 candidates doesn't mean you have 100 very qualified candidates. No differently than sourcing 10 candidates doesn't mean you don't have enough. It just depends on the role. And then ultimately here, there's an opportunity to educate the team on neurodiversity as a whole, so they know how this may show up in colleagues, whether they decide to disclose or not. And so this last example I want to share is around performance management. So let's say we have Alex. Alex is a data scientist that has actually disclosed that they have dyslexia, unlike our previous two examples. And despite Alex has phenomenal analytical skills, can identify patterns in complex data sets, their manager starts to doubt them because there are a few minor errors that show up in reports. And now the manager started to build this belief that this is something that is associated with all people who have dyslexia, and that they're going to struggle to perform their job effectively because of this. Now, for further context, Alex has been instrumental in developing innovative solutions for the team and the company, and has brought impact to the team. However, based on this, the manager in the next performance cycle decides not to promote Alex. So this one is a little bit different because the employee has disclosed. But from what you can see here, do you think that Alex's manager made the right decision based on the information you know to promote them? Feel free to respond with the appropriate emoji in the chat. For some reason, I cannot see. Oh, there we go. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely very evident in the chat. we're seeing what the issue is here. So ultimately, I say no, because in my opinion, the manager didn't have enough information to make that determination, and here's why. That decision sounds as though it was very influenced by this bias that had been developed about Alex, right? Despite the value that he's bringing to the team, that he can handle complex tasks or communicate effectively in writing, and just kind of generally felt that way about all employees that have dyslexia. And this is a form of ableism, and that's basically a discrimination or prejudice against people with disabilities, thinking that neurotypical behaviors are superior, right? And this is a problem. Because, and here's another reason why this is a problem, because maybe that's an issue for Alex, and maybe it is tied to the dyslexia, but we don't know that yet. But someone else with dyslexia could pose and present differently, right? So to make that assumption is not correct. So strategies for success: be curious, ask thoughtful questions to investigate the cause of the minor errors. What other factors could come into play? Did Alex's workload increase? Did you give him time restraints? And one common accommodation for neurodivergent talent could be to give them more time. If a turnaround for a report is, I'm just throwing a number out there, a week, maybe he needs an extra day, right? But the other thing is, since Alex did disclose, it's important to find out, is there an accommodation in place, right, to help with this challenge? And if not, if it is, great. See what it is to see if you and Alex have been implementing this to help avoid this. Maybe, if it has, maybe you need to tweak it. If not, this is a great opportunity to partner with whoever your HR leader is or HRBP to implement one. And then this might trigger an opportunity also to train all of the people managers on neurodiversity. So what's the solution? We talked about these specific examples and how it shows up in the workplace and strategies for success. But overarching, there are many ways we could tackle this and continue to do so in the workplace. But there's a solution that I believe wholeheartedly in that's been proven to be effective. I want to share with you today. And it's called creating an epic work culture. So I've developed a framework based on my experience in this field and doing this work of how we can make more work cultures more neuro-inclusive. And it starts with, and it's basically implemented with these 4 pillars, which we'll talk about here really quickly. And then from there, we'll go into our Q&A. So empathy. So it's super, super important, right, to position yourself as a leader, to kind of walk in a neurodivergent employee's shoes. Things that we often take for granted may be a trigger for them, right? Or that maybe not represent how they best show up in the workplace. And it's important because cognitive diverse teams often solve problems faster than those who have cognitive similarities. And empathetic leadership can harness the unique perspectives of those employees because they do think differently. And when you bring those different thoughts and minds together, you can create magic within your organization. So here's one way you can display empathy for those that you work with or lead a team, by actively listening, right? Giving your full attention to them when you are engaging with them. You make eye contact with them and give them space if they're not comfortable to do that with you, if they're not comfortable to return that eye contact. And then ask follow-up questions so you can get a clear perspective of what they're sharing with you about their experience. Don't be so quick to dismiss it. There was actually a study done by the Harvard Business Review that found that that cognitive diverse teams are often more impactful, right, than those who are thinking alike. So bringing people together to a table who all think alike often is not going to end innovation, right? So we want to keep that in mind. As you're developing that empathy, it's also important to create space to create psychological safety. It's really important to roll these out in this order because if you do one too soon, it often has an adverse impact. But psychological safety definitely increases impact on teams as well as your products and your processes. And this is important because when you have that empathy and then can create that psychological safety, that's really important because only about 4% of those employees with a disability disclose. 4%, that's it. Remember that huge gap in the population we were seeing, like just even from women to neurodivergent folks and how we can even talk about the intersectionality of that. And for those who have disclosed, there was a report that was associated with the ADA that about a third of those respondents in the survey indicated that there was a negative bias as a result in feeling underestimated, insulted, excluded, and even just treated weird by their colleagues because now people know they have a disability, right? And so one way you can create psychological safety as a leader in your organization is to openly discuss mistakes, leading with your own, right? And positioning those as lessons because now you're setting the tone for your team to say, it's okay to admit you made a mistake. And what did you learn from it? Rather than immediately going to cause for punishment because from a performance management standpoint, most things don't end in the worst case scenario, right? They're learning lessons that you tweak and learn from. And so this opens up opportunity for neurodivergent employees to be more vulnerable and transparent. Now that you have empathy and psychological safety, now it's time for those inclusive initiatives, right? Those ERGs and all of those other programming that we think about when it comes to DEI and having a great representation of marginalized communities and having that equity and sense of belonging. And the reason why this is so important, I've seen this time and time again, that if you come off too soon with just recognizing awareness month or something else significant that's happening, that's a one-off, now it appears to be performative. And that impacts your NPS scores with your candidates. It impacts your NPS score with your employees, right? Who could be your unsolicited brand ambassadors. But genuine allyship starts with, for example, I've been in groups where people were asking for recommendations for diversity job boards. And one of the things I often like to ask when given that, yes, I'll give them that information, but have you engaged with that community? Because if not, you may breed the perception that you're just coming here to recruit people to say, we have different looking faces or people who just think alike, think differently, right? But what are they able to add to your organization? What is their experience going to be like? Are they going to be heard and seen truly? So it's really important to develop leaders on empathy and psychological safety, and then, and you can do this simultaneously, then go into these inclusive initiatives. And then lastly, continuous improvement. So this also impacts companies going out to even your consumers, right? And your brand as a company. 66% of consumers are willing to pay more for products and services from companies that are committed to inclusion. And then even further than that, even in your candidate experience, and there was a software company that actually released this survey results that 80% of Gen Zers did not apply for a job because employers were not neuro-inclusive, right? That's a huge number for these. And there was definitely like hundreds of Gen Zers in this survey. But now add that to the fact that by 2030, we're on track that Gen Zers will be at least 30% of the workforce. There's a huge opportunity here. In order to fill that gap, we have to start looking at these things and implementing more. And one way to do that within continuous improvement is regular feedback loops. If you have collected data to formally understand the potential neurodivergent population in your organization, doing that once a year survey for this, it's not going to cut it. You're going to have to follow through regularly. That could be implementing monthly surveys or quarterly in-depth reviews and gathering input from these populations in order to understand, are you on track to making this better? Are you making progress? And lastly, this is proof. Doing these things is proof that you're not just doing it to be performative. So overall, inclusive, particularly neuro-inclusive work cultures enable companies to better understand and serve diverse teams, because even when it comes to accommodations, 80 to 90% of those accommodations can also benefit neurotypical employees. So it's not just about serving the audience directly, but it benefits everyone else as well. So with that, let's jump into some questions. I'm excited to hear from you all. I've done a lot of talking, so I want to hear from you all and answer some of your questions. So I'll hand it back over to Jessie.
Okay. Before we get into questions, can we all just like either come off mute, give a reaction in the chat or a reaction on Zoom, and just like round of applause for Tameka. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So awesome. All right. I don't know about you all, but I have loads of notes. Okay, I did not do a great job of managing these questions, but there's a couple in the chat here, Tameka. I don't know if you're able to see these. I hope, is it Elisa or Alyssa? I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name.
No, it's no problem. It's Alyssa.
Alyssa, thank you. You want to jump in and ask this first question? Okay, great.
Yes, of course. And I also just wanted to first say this has been incredible. It's been really eye-opening for me. There were so many data points that you mentioned that I was like, oh, this is so relatable. And it just, you really just did a fantastic job explaining everything. And so thank you so much. So I'll just read the question that I sent in the chat. In this return to office landscape, employees are being mandated to come back into the office after years of working from home. This new environment not only leads to discomfort of no longer being in your own space, but the overstimulation of the constant distractions, but the forced social interactions that come with working in person with others. I feel like these are just a few of the many roadblocks that, you know, come with being a neurodivergent person working in the office. So I was wondering, how do you recommend folks navigate this? And is there a way to kind of discuss with your manager and your peers without coming off as, you know, unwilling or, you know, not being a team player? I always find it to be a weird line. So I would love to hear if you have any advice on this.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate your vulnerability in sharing, just trying to navigate this type of situation. And you're right, it is an issue, because as you were talking, I was just thinking about even my own instances. I've worked remotely for quite some time, but even when I was in the office, before I realized what was going on, it was an issue. Oftentimes I had to close my office door to keep the noise down. And so I would say, depending on the relationship that you have with your manager, if you feel comfortable, start there, right? And partner with your HRBPs for you all to come up with a plan of a way that you can share that with your team. And here's a fun way that actually an employee did this in my last role. They actually had like a team huddle with the immediate team, and the person literally put together a slide deck and just kind of explained to people how this works for them. And it was really fun and engaging, and that fit their personality. That was totally aligned for them to do. And the team was super receptive, and they found it a cool way to share that, right? And so I would put that back to you to think about and start reflecting what is the most comfortable way for you, and partner with your manager and HR to determine what that looks like. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Yes.
Excellent.
Awesome. All right, there's another question here from Samina. Samina, you're welcome to come off mute and elaborate on this. Otherwise, I'm happy, or we can just read this for you, whatever you're comfortable with. But
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. Go
Sorry, I
ahead.
didn't even realize that my camera was off too. Yeah, so I'm here now, camera on and everything. I was eating earlier, that's why my camera was off and I forgot to turn it back on. Yeah, I mean, I have a question about people who claim to be neurodivergent because they've self-diagnosed, which is a valid thing. But because of self-diagnosis is so prevalent now, many people are just saying, I'm neurodivergent, and like there's no proof. I mean, not that the law says we have to show proof anyway, not here in Canada anyhow. I'm not sure about in the US, but I'm in Canada, and I mean, we can't ask for proof anyway. So, I mean, it doesn't matter. But I think I'm seeing this actually. I am actually neurodiverse and diagnosed with dyslexia. But I'm seeing this with other people that, you know, they just like, I'll just use the example of like, I want my camera off, because I mean, it does make a lot of people uncomfortable to have their cameras on, or the other excuses, all those things that you said in your talk about doing other things, multitasking, not paying attention, not really engaged in the conversation, whatever, you know, there's plenty of people who abuse those sort of things too, right? So how do you figure out when it's real and when it's abuse? Is basically my question.
From my experience, and I'm sure this is pretty biased, but my experience is to believe them, because it takes a lot, considering what we heard about, like only 4% of people with a disability disclose. For someone to come to a manager or someone who works in HR and share that takes a lot of vulnerability. And that's no shade to people who haven't disclosed. So the initial, just from a human standpoint, let's believe them and find out what we need to do to support them. This isn't a compliance training, but from a compliance standpoint, I would advise a manager not to go against this because it's a bad look, right? Because we don't know the ins and outs. You're right. Here in the US, you're not required. While you may be asked to provide a doctor's note about the abilities, the doctor does not have to disclose what the condition is, right? And so
in Canada, we can't even ask for a doctor's note.
Okay.
Yeah, we can't ask for anything. We have to go on the candidates or employees disclosure.
Mm-hmm.
But I am finding, especially as we become more and more accepting of these sort of things in our cultures, like just in general, that more and more people are jumping on the bandwagon, which is why we are seeing, and not that it's not legitimate, we're seeing it like your slide earlier where it's 20%, but actually they suspect it's actually higher, up at 40.
I was 40 years old when I was diagnosed. I'm 46 now.
Yeah, I was diagnosed and I was in grade 7 because I'm also older Gen X. So they didn't really understand any of this stuff when I was in school. It was just starting, which, that would be just before 1980, like you were saying, when I was diagnosed at grade 7, right? So I think it was 78 or something like that. So late 70s, because I was in high school through the 80s. So, but yeah, it's but I am finding, especially since I am involved with a lot of younger Gen X or Gen Zs, it's like everybody's neurodivergent for some reason or another.
You know what? I would definitely say, because of those employees that I have helped guide through this process, along with their manager, that statistics show that when they're properly accommodated, they're even more productive, right? The accommodations typically work. And it's important to consider the accommodations isn't just a one-time checkbox. It's a continuous learning process that you need to continue to do. So I would say follow the process through.
Love it. All right, we got time for a couple more questions. Want to hand it over to Michaela. Go ahead, Michaela. I think you might be on mute, Michaela.
How about now?
Yep, there we go.
Okay, sorry. I constantly have to switch back between like WebEx and Zoom and Teams at my work. And so sorry, I'm a little sick too. Thank you so much for your talk, Tameka. It was fantastic. I just had a question about the disability disclosure form. So I am in the market for a new position. And so I've been filling out some job applications. And as you know, there's a self-disclosure disability form that's mandated when you fill out a job. And I personally have not been diagnosed as neurodivergent, but I'm very educated on it given my work in this type of work. And I always choose to not answer out of principle. But I've often wondered, like, I wonder if me simply choosing not to answer is like flagging me as like, oh, we're not going to hire her because she's choosing not to answer. Like, it's supposed to be confidential, but like, you just never know. So I just kind of wonder what your thoughts are on that option of not to answer and just that form in general.
I can say in my experience, it's never been a factor, right?
Okay.
So I definitely wouldn't worry about that.
Okay, that's good to know.
I do hear candidates talk about this, even in my personal circles. People wonder, not just around neurodiversity or disability, but race and ethnicity. Should I answer that way? And that information is typically pretty sensitive. Now we have people who work in people ops teams and HRIS teams to where many times the recruiters don't even see it. So I wouldn't worry about that at all.
Okay, well, that's very reassuring to hear. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Michaela. All right, moving us on to my girl, Kayla. You want to come off mute and elaborate on your question?
Hey, yeah,
Hey.
so thank you so much, Tameka. I think this is really fantastic. One of my questions, because I've worked a lot with Jan and with others within HR and everything on trying to find good accommodations and coming up with support systems for those who are neurodivergent. And one of the ones that comes up constantly, and the question is, do you have any recommendations on adjustments or accommodation requests around dichotomous or polarized thinking patterns in neurodivergence? So that's talking about, like, you know, folks who are very black and white thinkers, they need something kind of explicit written down, or they may present constantly as like a challenge. If we're rolling out something new, if their supervisor is asking them to take on, you know, a new task or something, they are usually perceived as very, very assertive, and sometimes even, you know, oh, they just don't want to listen because they're asking so many questions, or they don't want to do this task. It's something that ends up coming up a lot and escalates to HR, but I haven't seen a lot of good recommendations around how to train and or provide accommodation for that for supervisors who aren't familiar with how dichotomous thinking works.
Ooh, this is a big one. I would say a couple of things come to my mind, and this is why I think it's so important to, not that everyone couldn't use this information, but starting with the leadership to understand what these things are and deeper education, because oftentimes, as you all saw in the examples, those behaviors that align with those conditions often are identified with someone who's a non-performer or underperforming. And so educating those leaders on that is a huge thing. And a lot of times, many of them have aha moments to think, I didn't even know, right, that this would possibly be what's going on. And understanding, like, real talk, if there are things, normally there are things in the neurodivergent community that there are things that we just kill it in, right? Just almost effortlessly when we're given the space to. And then there are other things that are just not our strength at all, right? And it's a little bit different than someone who is neurotypical that may be able to work on those things and really move the needle and to create that a strength. For some of us, it may not ever be a real strength. So it's like, what tools can we implement? What systems can we implement? Can we give a little bit more of a load on what their strengths are and a little bit less on what those things that are not their strengths are? For the leaders, for me, it starts with having a growth mindset to understand that oftentimes in hiring and employee and performance management, things are done, we think about one way. But as my mom often used to say, there's more than one way to pluck a chicken, right? And having a growth mindset is going to help in order to open up leaders' minds around, just because the employee doesn't perform this way doesn't make them a bad employee, right? And so I would navigate that through, first of all, incorporating into the training some coaching questions for the managers, having them bring some situations and talk and ask for thoughtful questions to help them pull out the answers they may already have. So I know that's not a specific solution, but I found that asking those thoughtful questions oftentimes bring pretty good aha moments for those leaders who want to learn.
All right. We might have more. I think I have 2 more questions. I'm sorry. The chat is on fire, so I'm like trying to keep up. K Ratro 1. I'm not sure if you're there, but the question, Tameka, is how does an employer ascension what constitutes an appropriate accommodation, particularly when there's a limited understanding of neurodivergence? Moreover, how can a company align its structure and resources to effectively support neurodivergent employees?
Ooh, this is a good one too. The appropriate accommodation, I'm assuming you're talking about what we refer to as a reasonable accommodation. It is, I wish it was a black and white issue. It is not a black and white issue. It really needs to be taken depending on the candidate or employee and the actual job itself. And the reason why, and when we had our Beyond Global Cultural First Global, I talked about how these things can present completely differently. You can have 10 different people with ADHD and they all respond differently. For me, I'm kind of the meticulous planner. I want to know what's coming. For someone else, they could completely like lean in ambiguity and be completely comfortable with that, right? So from one person to the next, and depending on the condition, that can look completely different. But you just have to look at the candidate, those behaviors, and the job to determine whether or not, is there a way that we can work around this, right? And it goes back to kind of that growth mindset of thinking more than one way, not being fixed on things being done one way. And then the other part of it is, as far as how can a company align resources, its structures and resources to effectively support neurodivergent employees. I say ERGs and things of that nature are great, and I'm not taking away from them. I've helped organize and start ERGs. However, I think the bigger solution, and this is something else that came out in one of the reports from the data people scientist team at Culture Am, is infusing, right? Infusing it into the culture, making it a part of the norms so that it doesn't appear as this separate issue, right? And that way more people have awareness in the organization. And like I said, 80 to 90% of those accommodations and resources oftentimes benefit the other neurotypical employees as well. So I would say integration and infusion of those norms.
All right, Tameka, one last question for you, wanting to keep this one kind of short and concise. Nick said, as a parent who has one diagnosed and one undiagnosed neurodiverse children, I'm aware that there is a genetic predisposition that I'm likely neurodiverse too. My question, as an older individual being diagnosed, how did the diagnosis change the way you manage yourself? And did anything change through the diagnosis?
Oh, wow. Yeah, a lot changed because my daughter was diagnosed, and it was actually a few years later that I was diagnosed. So at first, as I was learning how to help her, that was showing up in homework and chores that I was just having a really hard time getting her to do because she just didn't enjoy them, right? To me being diagnosed and now understanding it affected my parenting, right? It affected how I showed up for her. It affected how I also showed up for myself. And the biggest part was at work. It made me realize why I was feeling so exhausted trying to do things the way a neurotypical person was doing it. It wasn't working for me. Or when I was in school and I was seasick with math, right? And beating myself up because I didn't make the AB honor roll because I got a C in math because no one knew. None of us knew. So I would say a lot of things changed personally and professionally for me, for myself, the way I parented and the way that I showed up at work. And it was about me just embracing, this is who I am, right? I'm still going to learn and grow as much as I can and develop. It's not going to change that, but I had to change my approach to how I did that, right? Which means for me, setting boundaries, knowing that I need to keep a routine. And I'll give you an example. I hate working out. I absolutely hate it. I was telling Jess before our call that I had a good workout this morning, but the only way that works for me is I need a countdown clock. I'm giving you 30 minutes. That's all I'm doing. And at the end of that 30 minutes, I'm out the door, right? So that's an example of how things changed for me after the diagnosis.
I love it. All right. That is it for the Q&A portion. Tameka, will you stop sharing screen so we can see everyone? Again, can we give like some love in the chat or come off mute or reaction, whatever your preference is? Thank you so much, Tameka. This was amazing. This session was recorded, so we'll make sure we'll send it out to everyone in the follow-up email. If you're looking to stay involved with our community for the other stuff going on, obviously you can join our People Geek Slack community and keep the conversation going in a digital forum. So join Demario Bell, my colleague over there, and a lot of other amazing conversations are happening. Check out your local chapters to see if there are local gatherings happening. There's all sorts of other virtual events happening. Check out the Culture First podcast. We have a newsletter as well. There's lots of ways to stay involved. Upcoming events, we have another State of DEI, Navigating Challenges and Opportunities, where we're taking Culture Amp's recent report on the state of DE&I and hearing from some thought leaders on that. And right now, we just launched Psychedelics at Work, a new perspective on leadership development. So if you want to join us for that, really excited to have Stephen Huang, who works at MAPS, joining us for that session. So that's coming up in August. All right, let's do a chat box checkout. So maybe give me one emoji in the chat to just describe how you're feeling right now. Go ahead and press enter whenever you want. Oh, the blushing one. Disco ball. Yes, Hannah. Love it. Back to bed. So good. Yes. All right. I'll share this again with you. There you are. I know someone asked for this QR code. Give you a moment to take that. Cool. All right, squad. Well, thank you all for being here and being on this mission with us. Stay in touch, connect with us on LinkedIn or hit us up in People Geek Slack, but hope to see you at the next gathering, and cheers to co-creating a better world of work, everyone. Talk to you soon. Ciao, ciao for now.